director of the Healthy Relationships Initiative, as well as I am a professor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in the Department of Counseling and Educational Development, where I coordinate the couple and family counseling program. And our featured expert for today is Anita Faulkner, and she's a licensed professional counselor supervisor, and she also is the co-owner of Family Solutions Counseling Agency here in Greensboro, North Carolina, as well as Burlington and High Point and Archdale. And we're so thankful to have you here today. So if you could maybe start us off by just sharing a little bit about a background of your work and especially how it relates to our topic of parenting and discipline today.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for inviting me. First of all, it's an honor to be back here. This probably started when I graduated from UNCG with a master's degree in community counseling. So I left UNCG and joined my husband at Family Solutions. So we lead this mental health counseling agency, like you said, in several counties. But the very first thing that I did with Family Solutions was I worked with 3- and 4-year-olds at our Head Start mental health consulting program. So I was in rooms all day long for 4 years with just 3- and 4-year-olds. Then I went home to my 5- and 7-year-old boys, and it was really clear to me pretty quickly that I needed some more training, both personally and professionally, as we were really working with the 3- and 4-year-olds that were having behavior problems. So we have several decades now of working with really young children. That's really the focus of our agency, part of our agency. We see kids all ages, adults, couples, individuals, but probably the core of what we do is really working with young children. So I went on a little bit of a mission to figure out some things about discipline and behavior management. So I spent several years doing that and going home and testing everything out on my children, who are 17 and 19 now. So they have somewhat survived this process with me, and now I spend a lot of time working with different school systems, training teachers, preschool and elementary age teachers, and the main thing they want to talk about is discipline and how do they manage extreme behaviors in the classroom. So discipline is a hot topic. I would say it has been this common thread in my work with families, my individual work with adults and children. So many times it comes back to things about discipline, and they just taught me. They've taught me personally so many things. So this comes from a place of great interest, and it just comes up all the time.
Well, and I love that you have both the personal and the professional experiences to draw upon for our discussion today. I'm sure it's going to make for a really great discussion. So let's get started and dive into the topic of parenting discipline. Like you said, it's a really hot topic. It's certainly one that I know as a parent myself, too. It's something that can be really a day-to-day challenge, and it's an ongoing process as a parent. It's something that definitely requires a lot of work and thought. So just starting with a really broad question, I know a lot of us, we have different ideas of what discipline means, and it's a word that conjures up a lot of different images for different people. So let's try and start with a shared understanding of what we're talking about. So how do you even define discipline?
I had to kind of flip my understanding of discipline as I went through some of this training and my own experience with my children. So I really see discipline as teaching children how to behave. When you look at the word discipline, the root of that is disciple, which is to teach. And when I started thinking about that as an opportunity to teach, instead of putting all of this pressure on myself to find the perfect response or the perfect intervention, it's helpful for me to kind of draw that back to. So it really is about teaching kids. We have this opportunity to teach or punish or rescue, and the helpful part of that is teaching. And like you said, discipline, even just that word, brings up so many feelings and thoughts. Usually we kind of insert how we were disciplined as kids in our homes, with parents or caretakers, or even at school. What does that word even bring up for you? So I think the other thing that discipline brings up is a little bit of fear. We want problems to get fixed really quick. Like, we don't want to mess our kids up. We want to do the right thing. It's coming from a really good place, but discipline can really seem like an impossible task sometimes. So even just bringing that back to, this is an opportunity to teach.
It's definitely an area where parents struggle a lot. to know what to do, or any other sort of caregiver. And I think that that's really sort of revolutionary to think about this idea that it's teaching and it's not punishment. That's, I think, very different than the way that a lot of us think about what discipline means. So it'll be great to talk more about that and what that looks like. So I know discipline is something that can change a lot throughout the course of a child and parent's life. So before we start to think about some of the differences across different stages of life, what do you think are some core elements of discipline, in addition to the teaching aspect that you've already mentioned, that really could apply whether you're talking about a 2-year-old or a 18-year-old?
Because sometimes your 18-year-olds act like you,
right? Yeah.
You know, I think it's easier to think about it in terms of behavior. So, you know, all behavior is a form of communication. And when you think about babies, we're really, really good at getting that. Like when a baby cries, you try to figure out what's wrong and how to meet their needs. You know, so you're really working hard. Are they hungry? Do they need their diaper changed? We're very attuned to that. But as kids get a little bit older, this may resound with you as a parent, you know, you start to really see that as opposition, or, you know, their misbehavior is some form of disrespect to you. I know it's easy to work under the should. You know, this 2-year-old should know how to not throw a fit when we are in the grocery store. And that really gets us kind of far away from looking at that behavior as that's communication of a skill the child doesn't have yet or something they need. We are really quick to, oh my gosh, this is embarrassing me as a parent. This shouldn't be this way. I should be able to handle this. So that would be thing number one, is really seeing behavior as communication of something from a child. You know, like when a child snatches a toy, you know, say you have a toddler and they grab a toy from somebody else. One of the things we might typically say is, you know, we don't grab toys here. It is not nice to grab toys. And you find yourself as a parent lecturing your 2-year-old on, you know, why it's not a core value of our family to snatch toys. When, you know, you could easily just say, you really wanted to play with that toy. When you want to have a turn, say, let me have a turn. You know, so you're saying what they needed, what they wanted with grabbing the toy, and you're also giving them the words for what to do.
And that does seem like something that could really apply even as kids get into the teen years, in thinking about their misbehavior or the things that as a parent you wish they weren't doing. Yeah. That in a way is a form of communication. It's just very different to some extent than what a 2-year-old is communicating versus what a 17-year-old might be.
Well, but I think it leads into the next point of you start to bring in your own fears. When your teenager is getting into this form of miscommunication, and it seems like the stakes are a lot higher, and all of a sudden you're really, really scared for them, scared for yourself. It's harder to say you really wanted your friends to like you, and that must have been really hard. You know, you just want to go, I'm taking your keys and your phone and your car, you just want to shut it down and put them in a bubble. So, you know, that it comes back to this whole, when you model self-control for your kids, you know, you're teaching them that, you're showing them that, you're going to see that with your toddler or with your teenager. And I think that is the hardest part about discipline, is we want to discipline the child, but the truth is we have to discipline ourselves first. And that's where it gets really tricky, and that's where, you know, learning to calm yourself first, learning to take a pause, you know, before you react to this thing that just happened. You can't teach a skill that you don't have. You can't give a gift to your child that you don't have. I mean, I think of all of the disasters when I've yelled at my children for yelling at each other. You know, first of all, it was not helpful. It gave such a mixed message, you know, but learning to have some self-control yourself is really, you know, the greatest place to start. So if your kids are watching you throw fits all the time about problems in traffic, or, you know, if they're watching you react when life doesn't go your way, you know, that they're going to do the same. They're going to mimic the things that you are showing them.
So it sounds like as a parent, whether you're talking about really young children or older children or teenagers, it's a lot about managing your own reactions in terms of understanding how you're disciplining your child and what that looks like in your family.
Well, and, you know, even on a deeper level, the way that I treat myself is pretty much the way I'm going to treat my kids. You know, if I made a mistake and I just kind of go, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. Why did I make that decision? Why did I do that? My language to myself is probably going to filter out to my language with my kids. I'm probably in some way going to use that sort of shame-based thought. You know, if I can practice it on myself first, it's going to come out more naturally with my kids.
And I think, too, that brings up a good point, too, that a lot of it is really thinking about our children as learning more from what they're seeing from us, less from what we're doing or saying or how we're maybe even responding to behavior in a particular moment. It's really thinking about modeling the behaviors that we want our children to see or that we want to see in our children, and then we can see how they're responding too. So if they see us reacting in the traffic with yelling and getting really upset, then we can't be too surprised, I guess, if we see them reacting, if they don't get their way in a certain moment in a very similar fashion. So it's not just about responding to behavior, it's really thinking about sort of teaching them how to manage themselves and their emotions, and that's at any age.
It sounds so easy when we're talking about it, doesn't it?
But it's not easy at all.
Yeah. It's not that easy.
It can be easy sometimes, but most of the times it can be pretty challenging. So, well, let's take a closer look at some different ages and different stages of life. So, at what age does discipline even really begin? We don't discipline babies, do we?
Well, you know, I think when you start to look at behavior, communicating needs, you think about how do you get kids' cooperation. You know, willingness really comes from being connected. And I think really being connected to your baby in lots of ways, that's where these patterns of I'm with you, you're safe, you know, these are where some of these discipline kind of things start. It starts with your connection with babies. You know, so if your toddler headbutts you, yes, it's important for them to know how that hurts. Try that again. You know, so I think there are ways that you communicate, and the ways that you are with even your infants are important in kind of setting the stage for what they expect from you. Scary, out of control adults never help an infant, toddler, preteen, teenager ever stay calm when they're upset. Upset happens, you know, from the moment we're born. So really working again on that disciplining yourself, especially with babies.
So in the very early years, it's less about sort of punishing children, obviously, because they're probably too young to really even have the mental capacity to understand that, but starting to think about managing your own reactions in response to their behaviors, which might be just as upsetting as a behavior that an older child is actually intentionally acting out in a certain way.
You know, there was a great example that I heard in a training once, and it was talking about sharing your calm with even babies. And I thought about myself as my infant. You know, when your baby's crying, you know, what is your first reaction is to you know, and bounce them up and down. And that actually is activating their central nervous system. That's not really helping them calm down. But if you're able to take deep breaths and hold this infant close, they are going to start to mimic your breathing pattern. So even sharing your calm with an infant, I've thought about that so many times. You know, how many things am I doing to kind of activate my kid's central nervous system, you know, to say in nerdy clinical terms. So, you know, how am I helping them either calm down or escalate? And even from a baby's perspective, even sharing your breath with them, sharing your calm with them.
Well, and I think especially as we do think about getting a little bit older with children, it's almost that idea of sharing your calm is really relevant too, but it's almost harder to do that, right? If how can you stay calm when you do feel like your child might be intentionally disrespecting you? Even if maybe on some level you can understand, well, maybe they're not purposely trying to disrespect me, but it sure feels disrespectful in the moment. And it's easy, I think, a lot of times for a lot of parents to kind of, you know, get very upset in those moments. So, yeah, what does it look like as it gets a little bit older?
It's really hard. You know, I think one of the hardest things to understand is we learn most from making mistakes. You know, change is going to happen throughout your lifespan, and conflict is really where we learn how to be in the world. And, you know, it starts with toddlers, you know, ages 15 months to 3 years. tantrums are absolutely normal. You know, these are times when kids are really testing limits. Like, that's their major job in life, is to test limits and learn about their world. You know, this is where, like they tell you in the airplane, to put your oxygen mask on first. One of the things that I see as sort of traps in discipline and in the way that we discipline, even starting with toddlers. You know, once children are verbal and you're starting to have this verbal exchange with them, and that's where you really start feeling disrespected, I think, is when you start to hear words that are just not exciting to you as a parent. And, you know, again, this is totally normal and still annoying and really triggering for a lot of parents. I think beware of asking tons of questions. It's human nature to want to know, why did you hit your sister? You know, or how would you feel if she hit you? No toddler in the history of history is going to be able to tell you why they hit their sister. You know, so asking these questions is really giving space to escalate the situation.
So instead of a question like that, then what should a parent say, and what might a parent say instead?
Instead of asking a question, you might say, you know, you really wanted that toy. You really wanted to get her attention. Why don't you ask her instead of hitting her? You know, let's ask her. Let's go over and ask her. You know, and even in the moment, let's do it right then. Let's actually, instead of asking a toddler to use their words, they don't really have their words. Yeah, even though you wish they did, you know, giving them the words to say and actually showing them. Giving them some solutions to the problem instead of waiting for them to figure it out. You know, you could ask your sister, or we could wait, or we could choose to do something else. I also think using fewer words and positive commands. So a great example of this, there was a video, and it wasn't even a video about me. It was my husband was taping something else, but I was in the background nagging my boys. They had to have been about 5 and 7. Stop hitting each other. Stop touching each other. Don't do that. I mean, I think I've said what not to do 5 or 6 times in a row. And I was horrified. I thought, you know, what a nagging parent. That is not the way I want to be remembered, first of all. But second of all, if I say to my son, don't run, what's the last thing he heard? Run. Run. Mm-hmm. Right. Like, even in telling him what not to do, and I even feel it myself. If somebody tells me not to do something, there's a little tiny piece of me that actually wants to do that thing that they said not to do. So, you know, the better thing is walk like this. I'll show you. You know, so actually doing some close-up parenting and showing them what to do instead of trying to parent from across the room.
Right, and so really also focusing a lot on the positive of what you would like to see in your child and less about what you don't want to see, and really trying to bring it about there. But all of this also really makes me think about how hard it can be to do that if you are feeling stressed out. And so I think it does go back to a lot of self-care, healing from, if you have emotional traumas or difficult experiences in your life that you're still carrying around, it seems like it would be a lot harder to be able to do some of these more positive approaches to discipline.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, you know, give yourself the opportunity to make a mistake. You know, you'll get to try again. I guarantee you'll have another chance to go back and give a positive command. You'll have plenty of learning trials. You know, we say, you know, kids need so many opportunities to try again, to really learn a skill. I mean, learning to tell kids what you want and to even be able to think about that quickly, that takes a lot of practice. It really takes kind of rewiring our brains a little bit to tell them what we're looking for and what we want.
And what about when kids start getting a little bit older, maybe upper elementary school age? So they're definitely understanding things more, and I think that their behaviors start to change too. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's always just coming from like a toddler. I see this toy, I want it, I'm going to take it away. It's more, maybe more. There's more thinking behind it. So I would imagine that the thinking behind the discipline needs to change some too.
You know, and some of the core beliefs are still there, but when I think about older kids, I think about parenting my kids. You know, it's also, they're very different. Kids have really different temperaments, and you start to see different needs with kids. You know, really getting your child's attention for the first step. I might really think about going over to my child. Instead of trying to parent him from across the room, I might go over and really say, hey, oh, there you are. Hey, Bentley. Hey, it's time to get the forks out and set the table. Instead of from across the room causing all of this frustration because he didn't listen to me, he wouldn't get off his video game, all of that. So finding a way to capture your child's attention, your older child, it really goes a long way. Even older children, even going into preteens and teenage years, they want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They don't want to be nagged from across the room. So, one of my main goals is to really find a connection and find a way of actually getting some eye contact or getting their attention, because it's a setup, to really not get that first.
And I think that's definitely something as my kids have gotten older too that I've really noticed, that whereas when they were younger, it was easier to maybe apply the same discipline to both of them, but you're right, as they've gotten older, it's become more clear that one of them means something very different than the other one, and you have to handle the discipline situations really differently. So kind of a follow-up to that would be then, because then they start to say, well, that's not fair. You did this to this person, this to this person. So, how do you explain that to your children if you do have more than one child and they're seeing, well, because you as the parent are noticing that different types of discipline are needed, how do you explain that to kids who are really, they want, if they get the peanut butter and jelly sandwich, they want the slices to be cut exactly in half, and they can tell if you're off by about a centimeter. So,
yeah, and that brings a whole nother anxiety thing in. So part of it is developing a community within your family. This is the way we are. We all have things that we are working on. This is the thing that this child is working on. This is the thing that you're working on. And so really focusing it back on, we're just individuals here in this family. And so this is, if you're the captain of the ship and they trust that you have their best interest in mind, then they have to trust that too. One of the things that I think that I have watered down discipline with my kids, or watered down commands in particular, because discipline really comes down to when you think there's a misbehavior. You think things aren't going the way you want them to go, right? I do this Southern kind thing of asking a question. Are you ready for dinner? Are you ready to clean? I'll ask things in a question, or I'll pose it in a question when I really did not mean that as a question at all. When I realized how confusing that was to my children, because what child on the planet, if you say, are you ready to clean up your room?
I can't imagine any of them saying yes to that question.
Yeah. But, I think even as a parent, just noticing the way you talk to your kids, to your teens, notice when you're interrogating them. Notice when you're asking too many questions. Or when what is really a really simple command that's not emotional at all. If I ask them, are you ready to clean up, and they say no, then I get mad, and then they have a response. And you see how this kind of goes, and it could have really changed if I hadn't asked a question in the first place that was confusing and didn't say what I meant. Or, even modeling for your kids that you can make a choice and you can make a decision. I think about, we go into this tailspin of where are we going to eat for dinner? Oh, I don't care, where do you want to eat? Well, maybe you did care. Teaching your kids to be able to make a good choice. So, so many things come back to modeling and messing things up and trying again.
And I think it's also important not just to think about correcting the behaviors that we don't want to see, but also catching them when they do things right naturally. So you're right, most kids, if you say clean your room, are probably not naturally going to say, yes, I'm excited to do that. But every now and again, you might find them picking up something, and and don't overlook those things, right? We want to really reinforce them and make a big deal out of it. Like, great job! I love that you just did that. Or, wow, you actually shared something with your brother without me having to ask you to do that. That's amazing.
Well, and what you said is so important. Like, really, the things that you pay attention to are the things that are going to grow. And kids notice what you notice. If you notice that you're really actually being a good friend to your brother when you did this, or I noticed, they know when you're being genuine. They have this radar for when you said, oh, you're a great kid and you can do anything you want in the world. That's not authentic.
Right.
Kids really have a radar for when you actually notice them. They know when you're on your phone and you're like, yeah, that looks great. When I have one look at me kid, He's like, Mom, he's 19. He's still, look at me, look at me.
Oh, wow.
You know, the other kid is fine without any sort of response from me ever. But when I was on my phone, he knew I wasn't looking at him. He knew I wasn't paying attention, really. He knew that for sure. But when you're really noticing the things that you're looking for, praise those in a really authentic way. Or make a big deal. Or go out and have ice cream because you saw him being a good friend. It could be everything from here to there. But an authentic, you know, just noticing is good.
Yeah. I remember one time recently, my younger son actually surprised me by folding all of the laundry.
What?
He just did it on his own. I know he just did it. And I was like, I'm not going to do this for you every time, but here's $1. You know, I wanted him to know that I was really excited about that, and I was really appreciative of it. And, you know, those kind of opportunities don't happen very often, but when they happen as a parent, I think that they go such a long way for your discipline. So let's shift to a little bit to talk about when your kids do get older, because I think discipline in some ways is probably a little bit simpler when they're younger. Like $1 motivates my 9-year-old son just fine, you know, but then as kids get older, I think that's where a lot of fears as a parent, or it's a new kind of fear as a parent, like because you know that the trouble that kids can get into, middle school, high school, even college, you know, become a little bit more tangible and more scary for a lot of people. So what is discipline? How do you discipline a teenager?
It really all still goes back to connection, and that gets harder. You know, I think as we think about the challenges of connecting, you know, that would probably be some of the biggest challenges with discipline overall. You know, how do you compete with Fortnite and you know, other video games or time with friends? You know, they need to be spending time with friends. How do you maintain this relationship and this dialogue, and how do you, are you present with them and knowing what they're doing? I think that is part of it.
Keeping a strong connection during that phase.
Connection, yeah, and that is a challenge. Everything fights against that. Still making yourself open, still helping them with solutions, still coming from a calm place when everything in you wants to react out of fear and even rescuing. I would say some of our behaviors are more about rescuing them. The hardest thing to do is to let kids experience consequences for choices that they've made, and especially teenagers. Because sometimes the thing that happens is you are also punished in some way. If you have to take their car because they were driving recklessly, then also you have to drive them around as a parent.
Yeah.
So, you know, figuring out those places of balance. But the best thing that you can do is be in community with other parents so that you don't feel alone in this, and you're not completely operating out of a place of fear, you know, and connecting with programs in your community, to have community within some of this. There's so many shared experiences, and that's a way that you can increase your joy and maintain your calm, is to not feel like it's you against your teenager.
And I do think that's harder in the older years, because when you're younger, there's lots of play dates and classes for younger kids and playgroups in the neighborhood, and then the older kids get, I think, do you think that a lot of parents do in the teen years maybe tend to feel more isolated or disconnected from other families?
Oh, for sure. You know, in our work as counselors, people really come in just feeling so much anxiety, so much fear, and they feel alone. They feel backed into a corner by situations, by other things that are happening with other kids. You know, there's just a lot that goes into that, and to really find a place of connection as a parent, with another parent, with a professional, with someone that you trust, say, you know, this is really hard.
Yeah, and I think as you've mentioned some resources in the community, and I think that it's interesting to think about some of the unique challenges that parents face today, because like we've been talking a little bit about the isolation that a lot of parents may feel, and in fact, I think especially whether it's seniors, but even for very young children, I think a lot of parents do feel isolated and sort of confused about what to do as a parent. What do you think are some of the other big challenges that parents, specifically related to discipline, encounter in today's society?
I think that sometimes it's easier to do nothing Sometimes it's easier to just give in and give the ice cream or just ignore it or just let kids go off in their room with their video games. I think a lot of parents give up.
And a lot of parents say, I think, along those lines, they're tired, they're busy,
Yeah.
they're really stressed out, overworked, and so it is probably easier to sort of, it's easy to say, oh, well, I said no video games, but now I need to rest, so go ahead and play your video games, and then you're kind of overriding the effectiveness of some of your discipline.
Absolutely, and it is hard. The truth is, it's hard. It's hard to stay consistent. It's hard to follow through. I think when you start out not making the threat in the first place, then you haven't set yourself up for failure as a parent. I think there are lots of ways that we do set ourselves up. But yeah, it's just really, really important to try to maintain that connection with other people, with your children, so that you don't feel like you're drowning with no hope. And even just to dial it back to, at any age, just spend 5 minutes. Your presence is the thing that heals and calms. It really is. When you're able to get in that place where, okay, I'm just going to be with you for 5 minutes. I don't have to ask you a ton of questions. We don't have to solve the world's problems. It's still just us, and we can be together. So we tend to overcomplicate things. I tend to overcomplicate things. So as a parent, taking some of that pressure off of yourself, be with your kids. They're still your kids, and part of that is going to relieve some of this pressure to have the perfect response.
Right, and so if you feel like you have that strong relationship and that strong connection with your child, then it really gives the foundation, and it offers a lot of grace too, I think, in the parenting situations that, as a parent, you're not always going to have that perfect response in that moment, and sometimes you might, as a parent, look back and think, why did I do that, or why did I say that, what was I thinking, or that wasn't the best way, or I wish I would have done this. So, but when you have that strong bond and that strong connection with your child, one, I think the child really understands that any discipline is coming from a better place, and this is probably whether they're younger or even in the teen years. But then it also, I think, gives more flexibility and more room for, if you've made a mistake as a parent, it's easier to get back on track.
Well, and I think the other thing that's really helpful is just not to take it personally. Usually kids do not wake up in the morning and go, I just really want to ruin Mom's day. They're too egocentric for that. I think trying to have some space. You do not have to be the happy police for your kids. They're going to have days that they're not as happy. But you are the captain of the ship. You're guiding this thing, and for you to be calm enough and present enough to be able to be the guide and not the happy police and the best friend. And that's hard because you want them to be happy. You want them to like you. But that's where you have to be able to have some space with them.
And one thing I've always really believed too is that it is important as a parent to sometimes apologize to your kids. If you have done that thing and said something that maybe you're like, ooh, I wish I wouldn't have said that, or done that in the context of discipline, especially, to say, you know what, I'm really sorry, I shouldn't have done, or I shouldn't have said that. And I think that's really, a lot of parents maybe aren't comfortable with that, but it's really a powerful model for your kids because nobody's perfect, and for them to see that sometimes mom or dad messes things up too, but I can see that they actually can own it, accept responsibility for it, and apologize, I think can be really powerful.
And especially if you wait until the next day. You wait until things aren't as churned up, and you really give a genuine apology, and you tell them what you're going to try to do differently next time. And that shows them what you're trying for. It also shows that you're willing to try again, and you're probably willing to give them a chance to try again.
And so we're definitely wanting to make sure we're going to leave some time for some questions that we might be getting from people who are here today. But just a few other questions that I have for you as well. Let's say as a parent let's say every parent, I think, from time to time is going to have those moments where they're like, oh, I wish I would have done that differently, or boy, I wish I knew how to handle that situation. But let's say you're really struggling as a parent, or you notice that it went from once every 6 months to where you have that kind of slip-up moment to like it's starting to happen weekly or daily, and you're just getting really frustrated and feeling like the discipline isn't working. So what kind of resources are often available in communities that families can draw upon if they find themselves needing some help with discipline?
definitely getting connected to an agency that does some family counseling and even individual counseling for parents, sometimes exploring some of the ways that you were parented and how that's coming out in your own parenting. Sometimes that's really helpful. So there are lots of agencies locally that really specialize in that, both individual couples work between parents together and with family work that may involve children and maybe doing some conflict resolutions and some healthy communication work can be really helpful.
And what would, as a counselor yourself, and I'm a counselor too, so I have a few thoughts on this, but I'd love to hear your opinion, especially given the work that you do with so many kids in our community. How, as a parent, do you know, is this the time where I should go for individual counseling, or do I need to take my kids in the room, and do we all need to go, or just me? Is this kind of my own personal issue, or is this something we need to work on? So what would be your suggestion about how families should navigate that?
You know I'm going to say it depends.
Of course, that's the standard counseling
It's the standard
answer.
counseling answer, but it really does depend. I find as a therapist, it's more helpful to talk to parents first, especially when the child is coming in. There may be some information that might be embarrassing to them, or it might be helpful just to kind of get the parents' take on things first. And in that initial conversation, sometimes it's obvious, you know, it might be helpful for us to work together as parents first and then bring the kids in later. Sometimes there's a real crisis with a child, and you know, maybe there's some trauma that's happened. We need to do some specific trauma work with a child that may involve family work. But you know, some things are really better worked on individually. Maybe I'm teaching a skill with a child, they're learning a skill, and I bring the parent in for a joint session, and the child is teaching the parent, and then they practice that together. So, you know, there are lots of different ways of going about that, but it depends.
And the important thing, too, there, what I'm hearing in your answer, is to make that call. So, you know, maybe as the parent, you don't have to figure it out by yourself, but to call a counselor, and the counselor should be able to help you make that decision and maybe also help you get connected to some other resources, because there are also possibly parenting programs. Are there any other resources that you recommend that parents might look into?
One of the programs that we have a lot of training in is Incredible Years. It's an evidence-based practice based out of Seattle. But there's a parent program, a teacher program, and a child program. But I know locally there are some parent groups that are offered both in Guilford and Alamance County. That's about a 16-week group, and that's, you know, really build a community with other parents and kind of learn skills together with them. There's a lot of great work that happens in those parent groups. Another thing is really tapping into some podcasts. We talked about just how people gather information now. It's easy in the car. Finding some podcasts that are personally helpful to you, that's really helpful, just to use your time in the car to kind of help yourself find ways to find joy or get calm or even find some parenting skills. So there are lots of podcasts available.
And I know you brought a book.
I did bring a book. Conscious Discipline is one of my favorite models to work from. In fact, most of my core beliefs about discipline really come from conscious discipline. Dr. Becky Bailey developed this model, and most all of the scenarios about discipline are available on YouTube, so it's very accessible. But this book, Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline, is one of my favorite books. It gives so many real-life examples of helpful ways to respond to conflict. And you know, in this Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline, we've all been that. We are easy to love and difficult to discipline ourselves, and we see that in our children. But it's a real nurturing approach, and it's just very accessible. You know, there's so many snippets about conscious discipline that are available online, and there's a podcast and a blog and all of that. But I found it to be most helpful with parents that I've worked with teachers, and just personally.
Yeah, that's great. So the book is Easy to Love, Difficult to Discipline by Becky Bailey, and I think, you know, that'd be a great book to check out. And there's lots of other great books too. And I think one of the most important things is, like with podcasts or books, is just taking the time to read and learn more, and know that as a parent that you don't have to figure it out all by yourself. And you may read a book, whether it's that one or any others, and you may not agree 100% with what they say, but you might get some ideas that can be helpful, or you might read something and you might think, well, I would rather do it this way. With my child, this would be more helpful. And I think books like that are especially helpful as children get older, because everybody when they're young, I shouldn't say everybody, but almost everybody, I think, when they're getting, first oriented to parenting is reading everything they can because they are kind of clueless about what they're doing. But then, when we're in approaching the teen years or in the teen years and parenting, that's a time where we're maybe not thinking, oh, I should read a book about this. But there are some great books that are out there. So, but just taking that time almost, it's important to read something that's good quality, but it's almost just the importance of taking time and being intentional about your parenting and your discipline.
But that's the thing. What you are paying attention to, what you are growing in yourself, you're able to share that. And even the things that you're reading about, it's helpful because then you're able to share that with your kids and the people that you're around. So.
Yeah. Well, do we have any questions that have come in?
We do. We welcome any questions from our participants on this topic. And our first question is, how can parents maintain composure and effectively discipline their children during moments of stress and/or frustration?
I think if we could come up with a solution to that, we would be able to retire early.
I really like to think about almost a parent timeout in that way. How are you using the power of the pause? And before you really respond, to actually take 3 deep breaths. We're pretty quick to say, okay, look, just take a deep breath. But it really is important for us to be able to be in a calmer brain state and a way that we can approach this, to just take a few minutes and breathe. There's nothing wrong with waiting to react. And that sounds really simple. Again, that just takes a lot of practice. But if you can find something that helps you calm down, maybe it's music, maybe it's a smell, something that helps you calm down before you lash out and react.
So almost looking at kind of different phases, so taking the time to relax, stabilize, and then figure out what's maybe the big picture way that you're going to handle the discipline.
Even if it's just, my family was very kind in pointing out that I tuck my thumbs in when I'm really getting ready to react about something or I'm starting to feel anxious. It's just my cue to myself. If I can relax my hands first, it's probably going to go better. I'm probably going to have a gentler response, and I'm not going to escalate this child. So knowing within your own body, do you clench your jaws? What happens, to notice within yourself what happens. But that's a great question. We will all just be practicing that forever.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think going along with that too, I would always add, I think if people are really struggling or if they have any major stress in their life, whether it's work related or relationship related or some unresolved trauma in their own self that may not necessarily even have to do with the parenting. Obviously, you and I are counselors. We love and believe in the idea of going to counseling for those sort of things. But I think that is another way too, because I think a lot of times discipline situations, misbehavior can trigger if there's anything unresolved going on for people. And I know that that doesn't apply to everybody, but I think that's an important question for people to ask themselves.
And to ask myself, why am I having such a big response? My toddler just said they hate me. They didn't really mean it, but for some reason I'm hearing that in a different way, and I'm having this giant response to that. What is that? Even just to notice, what is that?
Yeah.
What is an effective way to deal with violent behavior in teenagers in the moment as well as following the incident?
Yeah, so violent behavior is a little bit different. That's in sort of a different category of figuring out what safety is. So, it's still a matter of figuring out what is going to escalate the situation and how do you think quickly in that. So, again, I would go back to not asking a lot of questions. When a person is so elevated, if there's violence going on, you have to figure out, what are your safety steps in that. Not asking a lot of questions, staying calm yourself, giving some solutions, and figuring out, the patterns in this. What has happened before? How does this manifest itself during and after? There's not a lot of problem solving that is happening in the middle of a violent situation. You have to make quick decisions about keeping yourself safe and keeping the other person safe, but really finding a way to de-escalate the situation, and that's different with different people. But I would still fall back on using fewer words, not moving directly toward a person who is violent, and finding ways of keeping your voice calm and your movement slow, and really looking for the patterns in this.
And I would say, too, because that question was really nicely worded to talk about both the immediate safety concerns and then how do we handle the aftermath of that. And I think that's where probably seeking help, whether it's from a specific counselor or even if there's a school counselor, if the teenager is in school, or it might be a trusted clergy person or something, just making sure, I think in that type of situation as a parent, you want to have some help and you want to have some support thinking through. It could even be a family member or somebody else who, who's good at thinking through situations like that. But
well, and I think also, Christine, one thing we haven't really talked about, sometimes it's really helpful to have evaluations. We learned so much from having a psychological evaluation with our child who had learning challenges, but they showed up as opposition and even aggression, sort of. But when we were understanding where this was really coming from, there may be some biological things. There may be medical issues going on, but when things get to that level of violence, you definitely need to seek the help of professionals to kind of help you get down to what's going to help this. Maybe it's medication, maybe it's counseling, maybe it's figuring out a medical condition, but lots of professional help with that kind of situation.
And I would add too, on top of all of that, I think it's also really important to not lose sight of the goodness in your child in those moments, especially because obviously that is a pretty extreme type of situation that can happen with kids. And so both the kids themselves can start to then see themselves, especially if it is, I need to go to counseling, I need to be evaluated, I need to have this, that, and the other thing. And this, I think, applies to any situation, is to remind them, you're a good kid, you're a good person, like, I still love you, just really reinforcing some of those positive messages, too.
And I think that's part of encouragement, is giving that hope. Kids need to know that you believe in them, that even though this is hard right now, that you believe that they're going to be able to figure this out, that together you can figure this out.
That's a great big fit.
Well, we've got some really great questions coming in. I think we have time for maybe two more.
Okay.
First question, do you have any advice for divorced parents where the parent in each household may discipline their children in totally different ways?
What a hard question. So one of the main things about discipline is you can only control yourself. You can only control what happens in your household. Now, certainly, when people can co-parent on the same page, that is ideal, but sometimes there's so many different things that are coming to play when divorce has happened, when there are two different families, there are two different households. So you have to calm yourself with the thought that I can only control myself. In fact, one of the things that we didn't talk about that I love to think about is that make me language. You make me so mad. Don't make me come in there. When I hear the make me happen, I know that I need to take a step back because, I actually only have the power to control myself. So I have to discipline myself. I'm sharing calm, working really hard to not have negative communication about the other parent. If you don't agree with what they're doing, that's just toxic to children, and children are often in the middle in that situation. So having that be the place that you're on the same page. We agree that we disagree, and we don't discuss that very much. But what I can control is when you're at my house. This is what we believe in. This is how we care for each other. We all love you. But again, it's helpful to sometimes have a counselor to help sort some of that out.
The other thing I would add to that, too, is you can talk with the child about how there are different expectations in different environments. So there's a different set of rules at school. There's a different set of rules if they're on a sports team, maybe, and they can navigate that in those situations. So that might be one way that parents could talk to their children about that.
That leads us into our next question. How can parents work in partnership with schools to support disciplinary efforts at home and at school?
Sometimes I think our tendency, or some of our tendencies as parents, is to not get very involved. I think being connected with teachers and school administration and counselors at school is one of the best gifts you can give your children. Know the teachers. Don't just show up when something is going wrong. You know, when you have that connection, it's that same, you know, core belief of discipline, really. When you have that connection, you're definitely able to make some different choices and probably get things done more quickly. So at every stage, not just in elementary school, to really have some kind of connection, to have an ally at school that you can call and you can talk to a person about concerns.
You discussed how to stay connected with teenagers. How can parents maintain and/or establish a connection with adolescents who practice the dreaded one-word response?
So you have to be this master in not asking yes or no questions. So, I mean, I did this yesterday. So tell me 2 things you really liked about your first day back at school. Just 2 things. And I will not bother you. I promise, 17-year-old, I will not bother you, but give me 2 things. And if he's like, lunch and when I drove home. Like, okay, give me more than that. You know, I think it's also having a playful response. We have this playful banter of, I know that you're going to say, you know, or give me the shrug. So how do I ask questions that are a little bit more open-ended, and do I know him well enough to say, so about philosophy, how was that class? Like, for real, what was one thing you talked about today? Did you watch another movie? Or, you know, so again, it's knowing your child, it's being connected with them, and kind of expect the one-word response. And you know, you can find a playful way, or just be okay with that. Every single time, they're not going to give you a discourse about what happened the first day of school.
And I think also they can really think about how do they capitalize on the moments where there are opportunities. Like, what are the times when the child is more likely to talk? So it could be when they're in the car and on the way to school. Maybe those are the moments where they're more open, and it's not at the dinner table, or it's not when they're wanting to play Fortnite. And, you know, but really trying to understand that it might not happen all the time. Maybe it's taking your child, if they love sports, taking them to a sports event, and maybe they're not going to be talking through the whole time, but maybe by the time you get to the 9th inning of that baseball game, you know, something happens and it opens up a moment. So even just understanding that it's not going to necessarily, like you're saying, be an ongoing dialogue, but trying to make the most of the moments when there are. All right, so I think we've kind of come to about the end of our time here today. So just before we wrap things up, Anita, do you have final thoughts that you'd like to share on the topic of parenting discipline? One big takeaway that you hope that people who are here with us might walk away from today's program with? One of my favorite things, this is kind of cheesy, but it's one of my favorite things I think of. Water the flowers and not the weeds. You know, the things that you really fertilize and water, those are the things that are going to grow. So really focusing on the positive things is helpful, because that's going to grow your relationships, and I think that goes a long way. Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It's been wonderful. You have just a wealth of knowledge. I could tell we could talk about this subject for probably a few more days, but we just thank you for being here and being part of this program. And we want to thank all of you for being here today with us, and we hope that what you learned here today is information that will be applicable to your relationships and your parenting. We do hope that you will provide feedback on the program today, as we are constantly trying to improve upon and strengthen and innovate in new and different ways with our HRI programming. And the link will be posted in the chat room as well, because I don't think that it will work directly from the slide. And just as a heads up, our next relationship booster will be 2 weeks from today on Friday, January 18th at 12 p.m. And the topic for that program is healthy boundaries and relationships. And we've got these programs coming up every first and third Friday of the month from now through May of 2019 in this initial phase of our rollout of this program. So we want to thank you all for being here today. Again, please take a few minutes to fill out our feedback form before you sign off. And with that, we'll say thank you and goodbye.